for tuning in to Hacks and Hobbies with your host, Junaid. In Season 2 of Hacks and Hobbies, we're visited by our amazing guests coming from all walks of life. We want to learn their story, their struggles, and their journey on how they got to where they are today. So stick around. In this episode, I get to talk with my good friend, Ahmed Qureshi. He's a long-time athlete and one of the top cyclists in our Team Velocipede group of cyclists. He has been one of the leaders and one of the organizers to a lot of the events and meetups that we do during cycling. And I've gotten to know him as one of the experts in a lot of the health aspects and a lot of the training and cycling all together. And being a long-term athlete himself, it's been a great journey learning from him and following his lead in the cycling arena. And I was lucky enough to get some time from Ahmed to come on the podcast and talk about cycling. Ahmed, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, you know me from over the past few years, having involvement in so many different hobbies, and cycling is one of my fun hobbies that I took to heart back in 2017, and I'm waiting to make a comeback this year. Hopefully, if it's not too late. So I wanted to bring you on and, talk a little bit about what's going on and how you got into cycling. So give us a little run.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up as a runner. Even before middle school, I was always just running around outside. I'd prefer to run around and be active and play outside than play video games inside. But then in middle school, I started running track and cross country, and that, went on to high school and then to college at VCU. Then one of the other guys on the team, Saad, he and I bought some mountain bikes, and then one thing led to another, and all of a sudden we've got about 10 of our Richmond buddies out there on the trails every weekend mountain biking. And that was really fun, as sort of an adjunct to running.
Yeah.
But then, I noticed that my knees were starting to ache a little bit on some of my longer runs, training for marathons and that sort of thing. So I figured the natural transition for most runners when they start to get aches and pains is to biking. And I saw how much I liked mountain biking. So then I learned of Team Velocipede through Asad Saqib. Saad introduced us after a Jumma one day when we were having lunch, and he told me about the team. I started emailing Faisal Kamdar, amongst other people, and they sort of guided me to buy my first road bike, which was a Trek Madone, 4.5 or something. It was nice, and I just never looked back. That was, I think my first ride with them was like Labor Day 2014. And
Nice.
So that was about, 4.5 years ago. So I love it. Cycling is, that's my main thing now. And running is now the adjunct to cycling. So,
That's pretty cool. It's like the two main things that have taken different seats. Okay, you're on the driver's side and I'm just going to hang out.
Yeah.
The seat. That's really cool. What's funny is that I also started through mountain biking and then got into road biking thanks to Saad's introduction. And that was really cool. And then I think my first ride was with you guys, was going up on, what's that, Skyline?
Oh, was that Skyline Drive? Yeah. That's a tough first ride.
I know. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing in the back of the pack? And luckily Nadir was hanging out with me for like 3.5 miles or maybe 2.5 miles. I can't even remember. And I was like, all right, I can't do it anymore. And my heart was racing. And then I was like, all right, I'm just going to go downhill. Can we just do it downhill? So that was my
Yeah,
first intro to it.
yeah, it wasn't really an out and back. It was an up and then a down, right?
Yeah,
Because it was
yeah,
like a 4 mile climb right out of the parking lot.
exactly.
That's asking a bit much.
Hmm. So that was crazy fun. But then as I grew to learn, about cycling and following you guys on, the Slack channels that we have, and learn about, okay, training is really important. I think that's one of the things you guys would talk about, training and whatnot. So we could touch a little bit on training, but I really wanted to, like, as a runner, like a lot of people say that, you got to have an athletic build. Is that true for any cyclist to get up there, or is that just an excuse?
No, not really. I mean, cycling really is what you make it. It can be anything from riding around the neighborhood with the kids to competing in races, and everything in between. And, I think Team Velocipede falls into all of those categories.
Yeah.
Um, cycling is an endurance activity at its core, so having an athletic build and, like a good aerobic base definitely helps, but it's not, a critical requirement. It just depends on what your goals are,
Mm-hmm.
and, we used to race a little bit more, not so much anymore. Now it's more like, just doing weekend rides and, not competing, but participating in centuries, 100-mile bike races,
Yeah.
and just sort of like, trying to be generally healthy. So those are sort of like the main focuses of our team currently. Some people still race, which
Yeah.
might require a little bit of specific training, but in general, you don't have to have like an athletic build or background to become a cyclist. Anyone can just jump on a bike, and with time, you may shed a few pounds. You'll definitely get in shape, and things will come together.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. Very, very true. So as we focus on being more healthy, and to be more healthy, you're exercising, or you're riding your bike, you're burning those calories. So one of the things that's been around, or I've heard of in the team, is keto, and I've not just through the team, but I've also seen other people around my work environment that they're like, oh, I'm on keto. I can't eat this or I can't eat that. So what is your experience with keto, and how does that play into cycling? Or let's just define keto, who that is, if people don't know, if my audience doesn't know what keto is.
Sure. Yeah. I actually didn't even hear about the ketogenic diet until, I guess it was about a little over a year ago, maybe like October of 2017. Myself and a few other guys were having like a post-Juma lunch with one of the other guys on the team. And he had just told us, okay, so I'm like starting this new diet that my doctor, sort of is steering me towards, because my hemoglobin A1C, which is like a 3-month measure of the glycosylated hemoglobin, it's sort of an indicator of, how well your body handles sugar. Apparently that was a little bit high. So his doctor was telling him, okay, you need to cut out the carbs. Why don't you try this ketogenic diet?
Yeah.
And so he was telling us about it, and we were baffled because none of us had heard about it before, although it's been around since the 50s. I think it initially started as a therapeutic diet for people with epilepsy. So like they would have seizures all of the time, and that's due to some of the neurons not being highly myelinated. So this high-fat, extremely low-carb diet would be beneficial in those circumstances. But lately, in the past few years, maybe the last 10 years, according to what I've heard, it's really come to the forefront as a diet for weight loss, as, less of a therapeutic, more of a weight loss diet. And so this teammate of ours was telling us that he's on it, and we sort of watched him over about 4 to 6 months, lose, maybe 30 pounds.
Wow.
And, I mean, that's good just for general health purposes. And his hemoglobin A1C came down to a normal level, which is great. But dropping 30 pounds as a cyclist is a big deal because, you're constantly like talking about that watts per kilo, and if you can reduce the denominator, you don't necessarily have to increase the numerator.
Yeah, exactly.
So he thereby got stronger by losing, that excess weight that is just like a spare tire sitting on the belly. So that's how, I heard about it. And then, this past fall, I myself and a few other guys were considering, doing it ourselves after we saw the success that our other teammate had with it. And there's so many benefits of the ketogenic diet, weight loss being just one of them. And although I didn't really have to lose any weight, typically in a off season, and we consider like the probably November through March as the off season or the slow season or the base building season, I typically gain about 5 pounds of just blubber anyway, just from less riding. The days are shorter, it's cold outside, and just sitting around eating a bunch of junk food. Every time I'm like at home watching TV, I'm just mindlessly snacking on like sugary foods and chocolate. Those are my addictions, and sugar really can become an addiction. So my main purpose in starting the keto diet was just to clean up my diet, to get off the carb cycle, the carb dependency of sugary foods. Not to say that all carbs are bad, but the refined sugars definitely are. There's no need for any of that in one's diet. So I think I started on Black Friday, had to start after Thanksgiving, of course.
Get it all in.
And I'm still going. So my plan is to just keep going until Ramadan starts. So that's going to be early May. So that will make December, January, February, March, April, about 5 months.
5 months into it.
So, And, since the last month, I guess I've sort of been increasing the carbs a little bit, but, it really starts with restricting the carbs. That's how you get into ketosis. So the idea is that you're reducing the carbs to an amount of like 50 grams or less a day, so that your body has to move to an alternative source of fuel. The easiest fuel for your body to burn is the carbohydrate because, it takes less energy for your body to turn a carb into energy. It all has to do with like the Krebs cycle and all that biology we learned back in high school and college. But the next thing in line, if you eliminate the carbs, is fat. So, let's say you reduce your carbs down to less than 50 grams a day. So after like 1 or 2 days, the glycogen that's stored in your liver will burn up, when you're sleeping and throughout the day. And then once your liver burns through its stored glycogen, it will start producing ketone bodies from the free fatty acids that you have stored in your body that are just sitting there waiting to be used, but never get a chance to be used if you keep eating carbs. So if you interrupt the cycle and stop the carbs, that will force your body to start burning some of that stored fat. And in each gram or in each pound of fat, there's 3,500 calories, which, is more than a day's worth of calories. So, I mean, you just think about how many pounds of fat the normal person has on their body. That's enough to keep them sustained for days on end.
That's really interesting. But when you mentioned that there's 3,500 calories in 1 pound of fat. And so one thing that I remember, and I guess it makes sense because of this fat number or calorie count. One thing that we learned in Cub Scouting was that, the threes, like you can survive without 3 minutes of air, or is it something like that? 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food. So that totally like goes back into all that fat that you're storing. It's so you can survive those days when you go without food.
Exactly. You know, a lot of the podcasts I've been listening to the last 4 months about keto always refer back to the primal ancestors, you know, and so they just sort of say, okay, you know, back in the day, you know, when food wasn't around at the grocery store and you had to hunt and survive, you wouldn't always get to eat, you know, every day. So you have to be able to go long periods of time without food, and that's where fat comes into play.
Yeah.
And there weren't a lot of carbs around then either. So, you know, it was mostly fat and meat, which are the main two components of the keto diet.
Beautiful. Well, so we know history of the origin of keto, where it came from, and then how it helped our teammate, because he from a health perspective. So that's really, really cool. And then that started triggering my head, because I have a tendency to eat a lot of sugars. I mean, day and night, I'm consuming sugars left and right, because either my body craves it. And then the other thing that I remember is sugar is also very addictive, because it has that immediate high, right? So you're always looking for, okay, what can give me that immediate high? And sugar has that effect. So are there any withdrawals when you first started going into like the keto diet?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There is, you know, instant gratification reward center in the brain, and the sugar does cause a dopamine release. And so when you look at a PET scan of people who are, you know, on drugs, you know, like whether it's cocaine or whatever, the reward center lights up when people take cocaine. Same thing happens when people eat sugar. So it really is an addiction, just like a drug. And, you know, the idea is to wean yourself off slowly. You know, I did a little research before I actually dove in and, you know, started the diet. And a lot of the stuff I was reading was saying, don't just stop sugar cold turkey, because you'll get symptoms such as the keto flu, right? And, you know, anyone who, you know, is Muslim and fasts during Ramadan, I think we've all experienced the first day of Ramadan. Everyone gets that crushing headache, you know, they feel weak and lethargic and a little bit shaky. That basically is the keto flu that people go through. So what they were recommending is do a week of low carb, right? Because I don't know, you know, carb intake could vary. If you're like, you know, a carb dependent endurance athlete, you might be taking in like 500 carbs a day, 500 grams of carbs, or you might be taking in 200. But the idea is to slowly transition. So I gave myself a week of low carb, and to me that meant cutting out the sugary snacks, right? So I would just, every time I'd mindlessly reach for a snack, I'd have to catch myself and say, oh no, we're not doing this anymore, right? So after a week of that, once Black Friday came, and it was time to, you know, stop all the carbs altogether, minus about 50 grams a day, which really those 50 grams, even if you're just counting the net carbs, come from like, you know, sources like nuts and, you know, vegetables and these sort of things. It's not like you can have a Snickers bar and say, okay, that's my 50 grams of carbs for the day. It's what we call incidental carbs that come from whole foods. So anyway, yeah, when I started on Black Friday, Black Friday wasn't too bad. You know, I went for a little bike ride on my own, but I was keeping it, you know, at a low intensity. We say we're doing math training, which is a whole nother podcast in itself. But that basically, that's mathotone training, where you're trying to keep your heart rate at 180 minus your age. And so basically the idea is that, you know, plus or minus 5 for this or 5 for that. But if you keep your heart rate low enough, you'll stay in the fat burning range where your body's optimal, you know, optimally burning fat. And if you go above that heart rate, then you're going to start burning sugar, and it's going to become like, you know, a tougher workout for your body. So anyway, the first thing I noticed was actually on a Sunday ride that me and all the guys on velocipede were doing a ride out there around Lovettsville, and it was maybe a 50 miler. And I did it fasted. So that means, I woke up, all I had before the ride was water, all I had during the ride was water, and I was trying to keep my heart rate low enough, but my plan was to, go out there and just see if I'm fat adapted yet, right? So fat adapted means, your body is recognizing that it doesn't have much glycogen in the muscles. So it needs to start utilizing some of your stored body fat. And, after that ride, I felt incredibly sore. I knew my body was going through something because, that sort of ride at that intensity shouldn't, elicit that type of, soreness from my muscles. So I could tell that something was happening.
Yeah.
And, so I guess that was about 2 days. Within about 2 or 3 days, I was in ketosis.
Yeah.
And for people who have been doing it longer, they could probably flip in and out of ketosis a little bit quicker than that. But since that was my first time truly being in ketosis, it took about 2 or 3 days. Although, I have done like plenty of fasted rides before, which, are supposed to help you become a better fat burner, but truly in ketosis, this was the first time. So that was my experience with it.
That's crazy. I've done some fasted rides. I remember back in 2017, but not at this level at all. That was a pretty intense. I'm sure it felt really intense for you, right? Experiencing that soreness, because being an athlete yourself and being riding for so long, like I was thinking about, you're trying to keep your heart rate low, but I remember like when we used to ride with you, you'd always have a low heart rate anyways. So like how low were you going for? It's, I can't even imagine.
I think from my, I guess, decades at this point of, endurance activities, I've built up, the metabolic machinery and the mitochondria and the muscular endurance. The body adapts. So, I think when the heart gets stronger and the body becomes efficient, the heart necessarily doesn't have to beat as fast, because there's like stroke volume times heart rate equals cardiac output.
Yeah.
It's just like, how you get watts on a bike. You could pedal hard. They call that torque, or you could spin the crank real fast. That's called cadence. So that's a good analogy, and if you're pedaling hard enough, you don't have to pedal as fast to get the same output, right? So I think my heart rate might be a little bit lower than an untrained person, but in general, the MAF training is supposed to optimize you for that, where like, they say 180 minus your age. So I guess I'm 37 at this point. So that'd be like 143. And then there's like other criteria that say, okay, if you've been improving physically in your sport for the last 2 years, you can add 5 beats to that. If you've been injured or had a couple colds the past year, or on any prescription medication like diabetes or blood pressure meds, then you have to subtract a certain amount. So I don't always add 5, but roughly my range is 143 to 148. Okay. So sometimes I just cut it in half and say 145. Yeah, but that's the high end, So I'd like to not let my heart rate go above that on what I consider to be like endurance rides. Of course, every now and then you're going to do like a tough group ride, where your heart rate's going to be pegged above that for, an hour or so. But that's more like the outlier than the norm, that's the exception to the rule.
So that takes us directly into cycling and how keto is helping become a better cyclist or a stronger cyclist. Which one would it be?
So, they say in regards to the keto diet that you're not trying to lose weight to become healthy by being on the keto diet. You're trying to become healthy via the keto diet and losing weight is, a byproduct of that, right? So same thing goes with cycling. It's like you could be, a very in shape cyclist, but you're like dependent upon carbs, and being in shape doesn't necessarily mean, and being fit doesn't mean being healthy, right?
Yeah.
So you have to sort of look at the big picture of things. As we get older, we get wiser, and we say the older I get, the faster I was, right? That's the saying. So it's like, I remember when I first started, I was so gung-ho. Every ride was going to be like, a speed-setting, record-breaking ride. But then, eventually your body starts to rebel, whether it's, achy joints, achy muscles, chronic inflammation, the thought that, well, I went out there and burned like 1,000 calories in an hour. I can eat whatever I want the rest of the day. And I fell into that same flawed mindset of, okay, well, I mean, alhamdulillah, I was blessed with a high metabolism. I think that's just like the way my body's made. Yeah. And then also I understood that, hey, I exercise all the time. So I saw myself being able to get away with eating a crappy diet. Yeah. And by that, I mean, refined sugars, however many carbs I want, all sorts of meat, and not nearly enough vegetables. So you can only go so long with that cycle before your body rebels. And so, seeing what my teammate went through with the keto diet and how healthy he got, it inspired all of us. And so I thought, okay, well, if I can just clean up my diet and get healthier in the long run, that may help with my cycling. In the short run, because it's like, and there have been studies on this, some like against it, some, for it. But like basically, if you're limiting your carbs to that low amount, you can expect that your muscle glycogen storage levels will be lower, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily matter if you're just doing mild intensity aerobic rides, right? Yeah. But when you're like putting the pedal to the metal and really dialing up the intensity, you will start to, use some of that stored glycogen. And when you're first starting the keto diet, that's going to be tough. They say like in the first 3 weeks, expect that you're not going to be able to lift as much weight. If you're in the weight room, you're not going to have as much like high-end energy, if you're doing like sprints or hill climbs or whatever. Yeah. So I did notice that my high-end engine was definitely lacking. But with time, that apparently is supposed to sort of correct itself to the point that, yes, you might only have half of the glycogen storage in your muscles as a person on the standard American diet. They call it the SAD diet, SAD, because it is sad, like how much carbs people eat. But you might only have half the glycogen, but you use it more sparingly. You use it like at a quarter of the rate. And you can eventually, after maybe 6 months or a year of being not strict keto, but just low carb in general, that your body will be able to replete that glycogen, just as quickly. Wow. So it's sort of like a long-term process. And the way that I feel about it is it's a good trade-off, I mean, if I'm getting healthier, and my lab tests are getting better, maybe I'm losing a few pounds, but I'm definitely leaning out and dropping some fat, and just eating better in general. That's worth the trade-off of not having, those few extra watts at the very high end, or maybe not being able to win the sprint finish on the local group ride or whatever. So,
but that's all.
You have to have a long-term outlook.
Yeah. So that's more like in the short run, you're going to feel these because you're just getting into it. But in the long run, you should be able to compete at a higher level. Is that what I'm getting? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. There was a study that I read recently. It came out in like 2016 called the FASTER study. And it's fat, adaptation substrate use of like trained endurance runners or something like that.
Yeah.
So basically, the N wasn't real big. They only had 16 in this study, but 8 of them were on the standard American diet. 8 of them had been on a low carb diet for, I think the average was like 20 months, so like a year and a half, which is a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're definitely like fat adapted. But the point of the study was that they were going to take these endurance runners, have them run at 65% VO2 max for 3 hours. So it's a glycogen depleting workout.
Mm-hmm.
And they took biopsies of the muscle and blood, like before, during, and after the run. And basically the results showed that, there was no more glycogen usage out of the fat adapted runners than the standard diet runners. And they repleted their glycogen just as fast. At the same time, during the activity, the fat adapted runners were using like 2.5 or 3 times more fatty acids as fuel, which is to be expected.
Yeah.
But they were doing it at a higher rate. So basically, when they say like, there's a graph where on the x-axis, it has like intensity, and then on the y-axis, it has percentage of like carbs or fat used, right? And so as you go to the right on the x-axis, the higher the intensity goes, you go from using mostly fat and very little glucose to they intersect, right, where you're using 50% fat, 50% glucose, at about the 50% intensity range, right?
Yeah.
And then when you go to even higher intensities, it goes to being mostly glycogen usage that your body's using and very little fat. So what they found was that the fat adapted runners were able to push the intensity of the run to 65% of their VO2 effort, and still be using mostly fat. So if you think about it, fat is a cleaner burning energy source anyway. It doesn't cause the inflammation that carbohydrates do when they're broken down, and inflammation is bad for a number of reasons. But, if you think about the fact that you only have a certain amount of glycogen stored in your muscles, it's a finite amount versus like the thousands and thousands of calories you have in your stored body fat. It's like an endless supply of energy. If you can tap into that energy and even use it at a higher intensity, that's a win-win, plus then you don't have to take in any extra carbohydrates on the bike or on the run, which, probably from doing centuries with us, that it's hard to suck down a gel and digest it when all the blood is in your working muscles and not in your gut, That's how you get like gut rot.
That's really, really interesting, because it's almost like either you're burning like fossil fuels.
Right. Yeah. They talk about it in terms of cars. Like, are you running on like dirty burning diesel, or are you a Tesla running on like clean burning electric energy, being efficient? Now, the caveat to that is the Tesla. Let's not talk about like the Model S, but just the Model 3, right? It might not be, or a Prius. Let's say a Prius. A Prius might not be as fast as a Porsche, right? But it's more efficient, right?
Yep.
And so it comes down to what your goals are and what's important to you. So like,
Absolutely.
if you're a racer and that's your job, you get paid to win races. So these Tour de France riders, they probably can't afford to be on the keto diet because they need every watt for that last sprint. But if you're just a Joe Blow out there on the weekends trying to like be social and have fun with your mates, then, it's okay. It's a good trade-off. In the long run, it'll be better for you to be healthy rather than to be fast. Because again, being fit is not the same thing as being healthy.
Absolutely. That's very, really, really cool. I like that. So having good health, because we need to just stop kidding ourselves, because we're all getting older. We're all, addicted to the sugar, and then eliminating sugar and carbohydrates is good for the body. Now, when you say, and I think you mentioned it was refined sugars, because fruits have a lot of sugars, right? There's vegetables that have sugar. So what's your limitation on how much you can consume of that? Because, there's grapes, apples, pears, and they have a ton of sugar in them. How do they?
Right. So some of the science behind keto is that, the magic number really is like 35 to 50 grams of carbs a day is what's required to get you into ketosis, which is not a very big amount. And as you just said, there's carbs in pretty much everything, except for like meat and even vegetables have carbs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the main three evils that you want to try to avoid at the very least are the refined sugars, which is in pretty much like all of the, shelf snacks, cookies and all this. You want to avoid the grains, the refined grains, because those cause inflammation, just like the refined sugars do. And the third one is the refined vegetable oils. That's a big one too, because soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, those are in everything pretty much.
Those are all refined oils?
Yeah, they're all refined oils. So it's like all the C's, corn, cottonseed, canola, and all the S's, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil. These are all refined. And in that refining process of the oil, they become oxidized. And so this starts to get into like the biology and chemistry of it. But when you have like refined or reactive oxygen species from the refining process, that causes inflammation. It just causes like a downstream cascade of something else to become reactive. And, that can lead to things like cancer, inflammation, and inflammation can lead to diabetes, heart disease. For the longest time, we were told that you want to avoid saturated fats, and that whole like food pyramid shows that the base is built out of carbs, and you want to just keep the fats to a minimum. There was this like scientist from, I don't know, the 50s or 60s that all of these podcasts and YouTube videos refer to. His name was Ansel Keys. And so people were in his pocket, and basically he skewed his data to show that, fat and saturated fat specifically led to higher incidences of heart disease in these certain countries. But he left out like half of the other countries where that data wasn't favorable for what he wanted to show. So after, decades of us being on this low fat, high carb diet, it led to all this disease, see this obesity epidemic in America. Recently, it's been shown that it's not actually the saturated fat that's causing the heart disease. It's the combination of these refined vegetable oils that are inflammatory by nature, and then combined with oxidative stress of, everyday life, and then also the refined sugars, which causes inflammation. So when you have like those three, that trifecta of heart disease, people are going to get heart disease. So people sometimes, when we talk about this high fat, moderate protein, low carb, ketogenic diet, people get scared because they're like, oh, well, fat's so bad. And you're eating how much saturated fat a day? But the thing that, I had to research myself and convince, other people of who I've spoke with is that there's good fats and there's bad fats, right? Saturated fat is not necessarily bad. It's those refined vegetable oils and fats that are the problem, the polyunsaturated fatty acids.
What's funny about well, not funny, but what really happened was it was the sugar companies that wanted to like put fats down, and they wanted to promote sugar, and that's why we have this what do you call it? That's why we had this low fat diet fad for the many years, because the sugar industry just wanted to pump out, like, oh, fat is bad, fat makes you look fat, right? It had that connotation. So it's really interesting how like everybody talking on keto is referring to that same doctor who did this research to show, sugars were bad.
And with the whole like primal concept, you just have to look back to what our ancestors ate, and they say, eat what your grandma ate, right?
Yeah.
Because in our grandmother and great grandmother's day, we didn't have all these shelf snacks, right? That were like loaded with sugar and partially hydrogenated vegetable oil so that they can have a longer shelf life, refined vegetable oils. That just wasn't even an option,
Yeah.
And in our grandmother's day, they didn't have this obesity epidemic, and heart disease is so prevalent, cancer now. So, I mean, if you just drop those three main evils out of your diet, you'll be doing yourself a great service. And you don't even really have to, cut out the carbs altogether, because there are carbs in a lot of good foods too. So carbs themselves are not the problem. It's the refined vegetable oils, refined grains, and refined sugars.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, that was a really good talk on, the importance of keto, the importance of controlling your diet, because as time goes on, we are getting older. We are getting, we are more susceptible to these diseases and whatnot. And if we control our diet and be in the moderate path, then definitely be in a good way. So we will have to do another talk on training and how that affects you to be a better rider and faster rider and whatnot. But before we go, there are some questions that I wanted to ask. So what is one hobby that you wish you got into?
Well, I mean, currently my hobbies are pretty much just cycling. But I don't know. I guess maybe hiking. Growing up and being a runner, I always preferred cross country to track.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of outdoorsy. I like mountain biking. So I think hiking would be pretty cool to get into. Just because I like being outdoors and it's sort of low intensity. It's not going to put too much of a stress on your body. To recover from. So I'd say hiking.
Nice, very cool. All right, so next question. Hiking is really good, by the way, and there's a ton of things we could talk about on hiking. The next question that I have is, what is your favorite movie or TV show?
Well, I don't know about movie, but growing up, I loved watching Seinfeld. That was pretty much my favorite show. I could probably give you a million quotes from that show. And then Curb Your Enthusiasm is sort of the spin-off of Seinfeld. So one of those two shows probably.
Okay, cool. Seinfeld was also my favorite. No, I didn't watch it growing up when it was actually airing. It was actually around 2000s that I was like, all right, I need to figure out what the Seinfeld business is. And so I started... I binge watched the 9 seasons and I was like, oh my God, quoting it every day at work. It was like, All right. Next question. Who is your favorite superhero?
Oh, geez. I don't know. Honestly, I'm not into the latest superhero movies, but I guess the first superhero movie that I watched when I was a kid was the Batman with Michael Keaton, with Jack Nicholson as the Joker. So, I mean, probably Batman.
All right, fantastic. Batman is one of the best superheroes around. It's really cool to hear. All right, last question? Yeah. If you were a board game, I know you're an outdoorsy guy, but if you were a board game, what board game would you be?
What, based on my personality or?
Yeah, personality, or what are you attracted to?
I mean, I like Monopoly. It's a multi-person game, and it's high stakes.
Absolutely, that is an awesome game as well. Cool, man. Well, this was a really good chat. And thank you so much for coming on. Where can my audience find you if they wanted to learn more about cycling, more about you and keto? Where can they find you?
Well, this evening you can find me with a couple of teammates at the Rest and Bike Club Thursday night ride. But in general, just at home or at work. I'm not really online. I have a Facebook account, but I never really get on there.
Okay.
I'm on Strava. That's pretty much the only social media
All right.
I have.
So they can find you riding on Strava and look at your awesome history of riding 5,000 miles in 1 year, right?
Yeah, you can find me on the streets.
There we go. We can find Ahmed on Strava. You can find him. I think he's written 1 or 2 blog posts on Team Velocipede's website, so you can check that out. And by the way, this podcast episode can also be found on teamvelocipede.org because that is our team, and we're talking about cycling, and we're posting stuff about cycling on there, so you can check that out over there as well. Well, thank you so much, Ahmed. We will definitely be chatting soon. I need to get out there, buddy.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me.
Absolutely, man. Take care.
All right, man. See ya.
Thank you for listening to Hacks and Hobbies. You can find additional information on the guest today on their website, hacksandhobbies.com. Please feel free to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on upcoming interviews with amazing guests.